In a previous video, I covered the entire backstory and explained in detail the Ogre and Kijin race found in that time I got reincarnated as a slime. So to continue this series, today's video will cover the Goblins and Hobgoblins who are also one of the prominent races featured in the series. And like before, I'll be taking a look at the history, lore and evolutionary stages of the race while also going over the notable members of the race as well. Now it goes without saying there will be spoilers for the Tensura series, so here's a spoiler warning just in case. Also, if you enjoyed the video and want more breakdowns like this, be sure to leave a like, share the video and subscribe to the channel, it really helps. So let's first go over the goblins found in the Tensura universe. They first came into existence actually by accident, and what I mean by this is that when Valdunava had tasked the ancestor to bring life into the world, the ancestor did so by creating the 4 progenitor races called the High Elves, High Dwarfs, Enkies and Merfolk, where all subsequent races came from. Goblins were no different, and they basically came from crossbreeding that happened between the descendants of the High Dwarfs and Enkies. And because goblins were quite far down the evolutionary line, their bloodline was extremely weak, which caused them to lose almost all semblance to their ancestors, and they were deemed to be a failed race. That's why goblins have a lot of negative traits like a very short lifespan, meaning they normally can only live around 20 to 30 years before dying from old age. And due to their short lifespan, goblins mature very fast, reaching adulthood at the age of 3 and becoming fully mature at the age of 5, which was the age they normally start to reproduce. But because goblins are extremely weak, many will often die before they even have the chance to reach adulthood. So in order to make up for the difference, they will normally have 5 to 10 children and have multiple partners to increase their chances of survival. There were also rare cases where goblins will become desperate or lose their senses, which cause them to target other races for procreation, behaving more like the malicious and evil goblins found in the Goblin Slayer universe. But again, this rarely happens because the goblins in the Tensura universe are actually more tame and less barbaric as compared to goblins portrayed in other media. That said, aside from a short lifespan, the goblins in Tensura are well, not that intelligent. They don't really understand the importance of acquiring knowledge to improve themselves or accumulating it so that they can pass it down to the next generation. They don't even have any type of formal language or writings to preserve their history, and they often communicate through the use of simple gestures, a few basic words, or with a much lesser version of thought communication. This lack of intelligence also meant that goblins have very limited knowledge when it came to magic or the handling of certain types of equipment. They can only use simple and basic equipment like daggers, and they can only work with leather-based items because things like metal armor were simply beyond their comprehension. That's why when we first see the goblins in the anime, the clothing they were wearing were quite primitive and the equipment they used had already degraded. Even their goblin village was a complete mess and the living conditions were no better as well, likely because hygiene wasn't exactly on their minds. However, they were at least intelligent enough to understand the concept of trading and bartering because they would often sell equipment or items they looted from the bodies of deceased adventurers to traveling kobold merchants for food or other resources. In any case, goblins are commonly found living within the Great Jura Forest. In individual tribal communities, they will normally have around 100 or so goblins. They have a rather primitive lifestyle as they will mostly just scavenge for food around the forest or sometimes venturing into human territories to steal from them, but most of the time, they will likely be killed by humans before getting anything. They do occasionally hunt weaker creatures as well, and it seems that they enjoy eating slimes. Good thing when Rimuru first met them he had a powerful aura, otherwise they definitely would have tried eating him. Jokes aside, goblins also don't really have any notable cultural aspects or concept of it like we see with the Ogre clan, although it seems that goblins do believe in the religious worship of godlike entities such as the storm dragon Veldora. So moving on, goblins were also extremely weak and fragile creatures, being ranked with a threat level of E, and it actually used to be lower, which was F, but it was later changed to E. It was for this reason that goblin tribes will usually work together if they are threatened, but if a situation is beyond their capabilities, they are quite ruthless and cowardly in that they won't hesitate to abandon another goblin tribe to save their own. This was actually what happened when Rigur's village was attacked by the dire wolves. The other goblin tribes essentially wanted to sacrifice his village so that they can have time to escape. And what's worse, when Rimuru defeated the dire wolves and saved Rigur's village, the other goblin tribes had the audacity to return and ask Rigurd to accept them into his village. But I guess it's only natural that the weak will flock to the strongest person, and they're lucky that Rimuru and Rigurd were so accepting. But anyways, that essentially covers everything about the goblins, and we can now move on to the hobgoblins. They were the next evolutionary stage of goblins, and it seems that they can only reach this stage through the naming ritual, but I think on a very rare occasion, a goblin does have the potential to evolve into a hobgoblin with their own strength. Also, I want to mention that although hobgoblin can be used to refer to the entire race itself, sometimes it's used mainly for the males, while goblina is the term that is used for the females. And there were many notable hobgoblins that Rimuru had named, but I'll go over them later in the video. Now, after evolving into a hobgoblin, they'll lose many of the negative traits associated with being goblins, like having an improved constitution and strength, along with a greater amount of magical capacity. This meant that hobgoblins have a longer lifespan, easily exceeding 100 years, and some older hobgoblins can even regain much of their youth, like what happened after Rigurd was named. Their physique will also change, becoming more human-like, although there were cases where some hobgoblins retained their goblin physique, like with Gobta and his friends. But that wasn't all. Even their threat levels increased as well, and depending on various factors such as equipment or the individual skills and training, their threat levels will range from a minimum of D to a maximum of A. However, a subsequent side effect of their improved constitution and extended lifespan is that hobgoblins have a lesser need for procreation. And because they have a higher magical capacity, this meant it took a larger amount of magic to have children, so it became more dangerous for them to procreate since magicals are basically the life force of magic-born creatures. But anyways, evolution did wonders for the intelligence level and mental capacity of hobgoblins. They now have greater understanding and comprehension of complex subjects like being able to learn language and take in information quicker. This was quite evident when Kijins and his dwarven brothers were hired to help rebuild the goblin village, and the hobgoblins were able to pick up many of the skills and techniques for architecture, crafting and metalwork in a surprisingly quick manner. When the Kijins and Vesta joined as well, many of the hobgoblins were able to quickly adapt and learn new skills from them like sewing, cooking, agriculture, fighting, hospitality and many more, which became essential in the development of Rimuru's newly established Tempest Federation. This basically kickstarted the period in which hobgoblins slowly developed their own culture, even if it was somewhat influenced by the worldview of Rimuru. But regardless, hobgoblins soon became more sophisticated and civilized, expanding the scope of their own sense of taste, aesthetic standard, and artistic vision. Hobgoblins will also become the largest demographic within the Tempest Federation, and they are not only involved in running the government but the everyday operations of the nation as well. And later when the Tempest Federation had a functioning military, the Hobgoblins made up a large portion of the personnel as well, with numerous divisions like the Green Numbers, Goblin Riders, Kurenai and the Yomigari. But technically only the Goblin Riders and Green Numbers were the divisions made up of pure Hobgoblins, because the Hobgoblins in the Kurenai and Yomigari had evolved into Kijins and Death Ogres respectively due to the influence of their commanders. Let's now go over some of the notable Hobgoblins that Rimuru had named, starting with the OG himself, Rigurd, the first ever monster to be given a name by Rimuru, and after receiving his name, he was able to regain much of his youth and even acquire a Gigachat physique as well. Later he received the title of Goblin Lord, and when the other goblin tribes that had previously abandoned Rigurd's village decided to join, he was quite forgiving and accepted them into his village. So with the addition of the 4 goblin tribes, Rimuru would promote Rigurd to the rank of Goblin King, and the 4 leaders of the tribes became goblin lords that worked under him. Now when the Tempest Federation was established, Rigurd was appointed as the Prime Minister, and as for what he did, he was basically responsible for all the administrative and diplomatic matters of the nation, ranging from paperwork, to interacting with diplomats or merchants, to coordinating the other government bodies, making sure the daily operations of Tempest were running smoothly. Rigurd really took his job seriously, and he was one of the reasons behind the explosive growth of Tempest, and as the series progressed, he definitely became a more dignified and talented leader worthy of his position. However, Rigurd wasn't always a serious person because he was quite a party animal, and he would always find excuses to throw parties or festivals whenever he has the opportunity. But in later portions of the story, Rigurd's appearances were limited since he wasn't really a fighter, so he mostly stayed behind in Tempest. It was to be expected though, because even in the latest volume of the light novel, Rigurd only had the threat level of slightly above rank A or the hazard class. But I do want to mention that prior to volume 8, Rigurd used to be considered the strongest hobgoblin in the series, although Gobta would eventually be the one to claim that title. Now the 4 goblin lords are also worth mentioning given their role in developing Tempest. Rigurd, Roger and Rigurd had evolved into hobgoblins after they were named by Rimuru, while Lilina had evolved into a goblina. They all served in the Tempest Federation cabinet, working under Rigurd and leading their own respective government branches. Rigurd is the head of the judicial branch and the Attorney General, responsible for overseeing the administration of justice from the Supreme Court. He also supervises and supports Carrera, the Chief Justice. Then for Rigurd, he is the head of the legislative branch, responsible for overseeing that the laws drafted and the legislation passed by the Tempest House of Representatives and the Senate do not interfere with the country's principles and operating policies. Next is Rigurd. He handles all the civil and internal affairs of Tempest. Later, when they establish a prosecution office under the executive branch, Ultima has served as the chief public prosecutor, so he is responsible for teaching her. As for Lilina, she handles multiple areas within the government, but she is mainly with the management department and is the Minister of Agriculture. She is responsible for the logistics, agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and livestock sectors of Tempest, but she also helps Shuna in handling their various production and manufacturing sectors as well. Aside from being a Minister of Agriculture, Lilina also serves as the representative for all the Goblinas, helping them to voice their issues within the government. Moving on, Rigur's second son was another notable Hobgoblin that Rimuru named. He was given the name of his deceased older brother Rigur and as a result evolved into a Hobgoblin, becoming taller and gaining a human-like physique. And when the dire wolves were defeated, he befriended one of them and it would become his companion. Rigur would later form the Goblin Riders and he briefly led the team, but eventually Gobta would take over as the leader. Also, after the Kijins had joined, he along with the other Goblin Riders had trained under Hakuro to improve their combat capabilities. When the Tempest Federation was established, Rigur was promoted to the head of security, serving under Benimaru, the Minister of Defense. His responsibility was to oversee the safety of the country and being in charge of their police force, although when he isn't busy handling security, he would serve as Rigur's assistant. He was occasionally sent out on envoy missions as well, like when Tempest had sent envoys to visit Eurozania. Now regarding his strength, prior to Volume 8 of the light novel, Rigur was actually considered to be stronger than Gobta and had a threat level that easily surpassed rank A. He even participated in a counter-attack against the Falmouth army alongside Gobta, Hakuro and Gelt, where we briefly saw his skills as a warrior. Next is none other than the hidden protagonist of Tensura, Gobta, the strongest Hobgoblin in the series, and because I already done an entire video on him, I'll quickly go over some of his notable traits, but if you want to know more about him, be sure to click on the top right corner to watch that video. So after Gobta received a name from Rimuru, he evolved into a Hobgoblin but his appearances remained the same. Now he is often considered to be a fool, but when the situation calls for it, he would always find a way to win. That's why Rimuru said that Gobta might secretly be a genius, but we all know that Gobta is just hiding his true powers so that he won't overshadow Rimuru. In all seriousness, Gobta really does deserve the title of the strongest Hobgoblin, as he is the only one that has access to an ultimate skill. Granted, he has to be fully merged with Ranga, but when he is, he has a rank of Special S or Disaster class threat level. That wasn't all, Gobta also has quite a crazy resume. He's the leader of the Goblin Riders, one of Rimuru's 4 Heavenly Kings, the military commander of the First Corps, and the only subordinate that is able to call Rimuru by his name without any honorifics. That said, Gobemon is another very notable Hobgoblin, but sadly, he hasn't appeared in the anime yet and has only been shown in the manga and light novel. Regarding his character, he was considered to be one of the stronger Hobgoblins in the series and he was quite a talented fighter as well. He was also a very ambitious individual and he was extremely confident in his own abilities. That's why he often looked down on the other Hobgoblins, especially Gobta, and you could say that Gobemon was technically Gobta's rival since he always liked to compete with him. Gobemon even fought for the vice-captain position of the Goblin Riders when Rigur was still captain, but when Gobta was promoted to captain, he moved to another division, not wanting to work under him. And although Gobemon has a pretty terrible personality, he was able to eventually fix his attitude when Rimuru transferred him to work as the bodyguard of Miomao, where he managed to learn to work with others. As for how strong Gobemon was, he has a threat level that was above rank A, so nothing too fancy, and he was one of the Hobgoblins that evolved into a Kijin when he was working under Benimaru, but he will retain his Hobgoblin appearances. Hopefully at some point in the future he will make an appearance in the anime. Now before I end the video, there's a few more Hobgoblins I want to quickly mention. The first is Gobta, who was one of the head chefs in the Tempest Central Kitchen. He was the second group of goblins to be named by Rimuru, and later when the Kijins joined Tempest, he became one of Shuna's apprentices and her main assistant in the kitchen. He was able to greatly improve his cooking skills and he was the one that successfully recreated ramen based on Rimuru's descriptions. Next is Haruna, one of the original goblins in Rigur's village that was named by Rimuru, and she will be the one that took care of him when he entered into sleep mode. And similar to Gobta, Haruna became the apprentice of Shuna, which allowed her proficiency in sewing and cooking to greatly improve. Later, she also studied under Vesta to learn proper social and service etiquette and hospitality skills. Because of her training, she became an amazing attendant, seamstress, and chef that is worthy of serving even the highest of nobles. Lastly, I just have to mention the little goblina that we see in the spin-off anime Tensura Nikki. She is probably one of the cutest characters that has been introduced in the series so far. She likes to spend time with Papa Gelt, and her relationship with him is just super wholesome. Also, her name is apparently Kokobu, and it just sounds super adorable. So with that said, who's your favorite Hobgoblin? Feel free to share your choices down below. Mine's definitely Rigurd, Gobta, Lilina, and the little Goblina. But yeah, that was all the information I was able to gather for the Goblins and Hobgoblins, and hopefully I managed to cover everything. If you enjoyed this video and want me to cover another race or some other topics, leave your suggestions down below. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe everyone.